Well, this is Dateline News and Conversation. We're live. We're going to be live on Facebook, on YouTube, and on X. And I want to ask you at the outset, if you appreciate the really extraordinary guests that I have on my shows and the discussions that we have, please like and also subscribe to help us expand the reach of these important topics and folks that I interviewed. Tonight, I've got really one of my favorite people. He's become a good friend. He's a go-to person for so many international issues. Peter Kuznick. Peter, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Regis. Glad to be with you.
So those of you that need an introduction, Peter is a professor of history at the American University. He's also the, founder of the Nuclear Studies Institute at American University. He also co-authored with Oliver Stone The Untold History of the United States, and now there's Volume 1 and Volume 2. So, Peter, it's really great to have you back. I'm not the only one that appreciates your insights and analysis to what's happening in the world today. I know you're very busy. You're doing interviews constantly with media from all over the world. So I'm really happy and privileged to have you back. But Peter,
Regis, I'm never too busy to do an interview with you.
Well, thank you, Peter. That's very important to me. There's so much going on, Peter. It's hard to narrow it down for a show like this, and to keep it focused. But I want to focus on three things today. I want to focus on. It's always about Donald Trump. I mean, what he's doing every day, multiple times a day, is just creating more chaos all over the world. So tonight, I want to focus on his threats and the strangulation of Cuba and what the future of Cuba is going to look like. I want to focus on the greatest armada the world has ever seen, which Trump has sailed into the Middle East, the Persian Gulf. And Peter, also very interesting that China and Russia have joined Iran in live fire, I've heard, naval activity in the Straits of Hormuz. I want your opinion on that. And then, Peter, it really caused me a great deal of pain to watch what unfolded in Minneapolis with Trump's, basically his private Gestapo, Nazi, jackboot army, ICE, and what they've done in Minneapolis. And it's not just Minneapolis, Peter, as you know, it's around the country. Yeah. So let's first start with Cuba. What do you see happening there? Does the government of Cuba have a chance of withstanding a Trump orchestrated regime change and take over that country? What are your thoughts, Peter?
My thought is that this is Marco Rubio's wet dream coming to life now. This is Rubio's baby, his obsession, his power play, and his attempt to overthrow the Cuban government. Will it succeed is a difficult one, because Cuba imports more than half of its oil, which it needs for its energy infrastructure to maintain electricity. The Cuban people are already suffering. And now what Trump is doing, after he kidnapped the leader of Venezuela, Venezuela was not the biggest supplier of oil to Cuba. 44% of Cuba's imports came from Mexico and still do. 25% from Venezuela, about 15% from Russia. So Cuba was dependent because this accounted for more than 50% of Cuba's oil usage. Can they survive? They can survive if Russia and Mexico stand up to Trump. If they don't quake, if they stand up and keep providing the oil that Cuba desperately needs, then Cuba can survive. It will be tough. There'll be a lot of austerity there, a lot of suffering. Trump's trying to impose that kind of excuse me, that kind of suffering. Not that the suffering is anything to sneeze at, excuse me. But the reality is that the Cubans have known hardship for a long time. And often, what we've seen, for example, with Trump's threats against Justin Trudeau, that led to Carney's victory in Canada. Very often, Trump's threats backfire. The world sees Trump as a fascist bully at this point, who's out to punish people, wreak havoc, make people suffer, and show how powerful he is. Well, there are two ways to respond to that. One is to stand up to a bully and say that you're not going to be intimidated. The other is to quake and give in. Around the world, we've seen both things happen. More often, countries have given in to this kind of threats and bullying, but not in all cases. China very much stood up to Trump in the trade wars, and Trump backed down. We've seen Trump back down time and time again. So what's going to happen with Cuba? It's a very difficult situation. Trump has already threatened Mexico. Sheinbaum and Mexican's foreign policy has been supportive of Cuba for decades. Are they going to give in to Trump and Trump's bullying? Trump has threatened trade war with Mexico. Trump has threatened military attacks against the cartels in Mexico. Is Trump capable of doing that? Yes. Mexico does not have the kind of military that can really resist a U.S. attack or invasion, or bombing. So Mexico is threatened. We see that Petro from Colombia is coming to the White House. Trump has been threatening Colombia. Petro is very independent. He doesn't support Trump's right-wing policies in Latin America. But the pressure that all of these leaders feel is based on the knowledge that with Trump, might makes right. As Trump said, I could give you the quote, it is so outrageous. When he was asked by the New York Times, Trump says, he was asked by the New York Times, are there any limits to his global power? Trump said, yeah, there is one thing, my own morality, my own mind. It's the only thing that can stop me. Well, he's surrounded by the Stephen Millers and the Pete Hegseths and the Kristi Noems and the Kash Patels and these other thugs, or the anti-communist obsessives like Marco Rubio. And, so it's a very dangerous situation. Nobody wants to see us go to World War III. Nobody wants to see nuclear war. But as you know, Regis, 3 days from now, the last nuclear arms control treaty expires. We are in a crazy moment in history right now with the biggest thug of all, Donald Trump, arguably the biggest thug since Hitler, when Hitler was killed in 1945. We've had other bad actors, other malefactors out there, but nobody more dangerous than Trump is at this moment. Unhinged, delusional, omnipotent, power-hungry, narcissistic, and cruel. So our other country, I hope Russia stands up. I hope Russia doubles and triples its oil supplies to Cuba. That would be a statement, the kind of statement the world needs now. What Trump is doing has been denounced by Putin and other Russian leaders, denounced by the Chinese, denounced by people all over the world. Even if they don't like the Cuban government, they like less what Trump is doing. So we're at a pivotal inflection point. And if the world caves into Trump on this, then there's really no stopping Trump.
Peter, I want to comment on a couple of things you said. I too hope that Russia and even China are going to help Cuba. I think it's very important for both of them to do that, because it's basically standing up to Trump, not on their own borders, but helping a very small, weak, and really defenseless country.
But a heroic country that has resisted this kind of regime change pressure for decades.
60 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
More than 60 years already. That embargo has been in place for more than 60 years.
So you mentioned a couple other things. That Petro from Colombia is now in Washington, D.C. He's supposed to meet Trump tomorrow. He has been a very strong proponent of resisting Trump in Central and South America. One of my good friends, and maybe you know him also, Dan Kovalik, who has spent many, many years in Venezuela and Colombia and South America and Central America, is actually advising Petro right now before his meeting with Trump. And knowing Dan, I hope he is able to encourage Petro to stand firm to resist what Trump is trying to do in South America, and now even he's threatening Colombia. Yeah. You know, you mentioned a couple of other things, and I've been calling Trump a fascist for just about the entire time that he was elected and inaugurated this last time. I think there's no other way to describe him.
You know what I find interesting? I don't think Trump has the brain width to be an actual philosophical fascist. I know he kept a copy of Hitler's speeches by his night table, his former wife said, and he would read them at night. And he absorbed some of the blood stuff and the racist stuff. But he's got a very small brain and a very short attention span. And so I think he's a bully who wants to be the tough guy and run the world. But the people around him are fascists, and they're the ones he listens. Stephen Miller is perhaps the biggest fascist on the planet, which is bizarre. His family has disowned him. He's the most vile, hated person. And he said, I've quoted Trump before, but Miller says we live in a world, in the real world, that is governed by strength, is governed by force, governed by power. These are the iron laws of the world since the beginning of time. That's the way these people look at it. We can force anybody to do what we want. We can take their resources. We can grab them by the pussy. We can, become best friends with Jeffrey Epstein. We can invade countries. We can kidnap leaders. We can threaten anybody. We can go to war. He's already bombed 7 countries the first year in office. There used to be the rules-based international order, which was a joke of its own sort, because the rules were imposed by the United States, which then proceeded to break them whenever it wanted. So the United States invaded country after country and said, well, we made the rules, we're allowed to do that, but nobody else is allowed to. But this is, beyond that. Now there's no pretense of international law or international morality. It's Trump's morality. Whatever Trump wants is what flies. And all these sycophants and enablers go along with that. The U.S. Congress, the Supreme Court, we've never seen anything like that in the United States, at least, which never lived up to its ideals, but at least professed having ideals. Now there's not even a pretense of morality. It's simple, and the world sees this, which is why if Russia and China stand up, short of war, we hope, they will be cheered on by the rest of humanity.
Well, Peter, talking about Trump, and there's a Latin phrase, "minus habens," meaning he's got less up here. His mother, I read this quote, and I hope it's not fake, but it's from quite a while ago. He's pictured with his mother and his father, and she said, I love my son, but he's an idiot, and I hope that he never gets into politics.
If you can find that, please send it to me, because I would.
I'll look for it again. Anyway,
what kind of American names his son Baron, for example? What are we, British royalty?
Yeah.
Mad King Donald, can't get enough of. He loves going to England. He loves all the pomp and circumstance. He loves Macron's military parades. He's announced he's going to shut down the Kennedy Center for renovations for 2 years because nobody will perform there since he's put his name on it and taken over.
It's amazing. I mean, Peter, I described it this way earlier this week with another friend. I said, Trump's has he's Adolf Hitler on steroids. Yeah. Hitler could never have dreamed of doing what Trump has been doing in the last year around the entire world. And yet, I agree with you. I think Trump is a minus habens. Yeah. I don't think he has a lot up here. You mentioned, Peter, his attention span is very short. Yeah. And it's well known he does not like to read. Right. He's listening to whoever's talking to him in this ear and in that ear, and then who knows what he's going to say or do. So he's a really very dangerous personality, and basically this is what we're saying. And then he's got these people around him that you mentioned, Marco Rubio. I call him Narco Rubio. Yeah. Trump mentioned something about he's going to make him the governor of Cuba or a viceroy of Cuba. I mean, Peter, you cannot make this crazy stuff up. You just can't.
But Regis, you saw what he issued that executive order on January 29th about Cuba. And he says, I find that the policies, practices, and actions of the government of Cuba constitute an unusual and extraordinary threat, which has its source in whole or substantial part outside the U.S. to national security and foreign policy of the U.S. The government of Cuba has taken extraordinary actions that harm and threaten the United States. The regime aligns itself with and provides support for numerous hostile countries, transnational terrorist groups, and malign actors adverse to the U.S., including the governments of the Russian Federation, the People's Republic of China, the government of Iran, Hamas, and Hezbollah. Then he says the Cuban communist regime supports terrorism and destabilizes the region through migration and violence. The Cuban regime continues to spread its communist ideas, policies, and practices around the Western Hemisphere, threatening the foreign policy of the United States. I find that the policies, practices, and actions of the government of Cuba directly threaten the safety, national security, and foreign policy of the United States. Well, I can tell you, I've never felt threatened by Cuba.
It's outrageous. Peter, listen, Trump did not write that. He's not capable of.
That's Marco.
Well, even somebody else probably gave Marco Rubio the bullet points but Trump is not capable of talking like that. And then when you compare that with Trump's view of himself, I follow my own morality. Okay, I don't need international law. I follow my own morality and what's in mind. When you compare those two statements,
and you go further, and the United Nations, Guterres says the United Nations might run out of money in July, which is Trump's doing again. his board of peace, maybe he's forgotten about it by now because that was last week's fantasy. But the board, he pulls the U.S. out of all these UN treaties and organizations, cuts the U.S. funding. The UN is threatened, and he wants to replace it with his so-called board of peace. I mean, this is madness on a global scale, and our species might not survive all this insanity.
And there are not too many of us that are saying that. It really is about the survival of our species, humanity. This is, I don't think humanity has ever witnessed such an imminent existential threat to its existence.
No,
so
we're at the atomic scientists moved the hands of the doomsday clock last week from 89 seconds before midnight to 85 seconds. They should be moving it 30 seconds. It should be 30 seconds before midnight.
Well, Peter, in 2016, I published my documentary. It was about the threat of nuclear war between the United States and Russia. I called it 30 seconds to midnight back then. Yes, and I've said repeatedly, if I were to release that film today, it would be the final countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, hold. And I think that's where we are. And anyway, I want to move on from Cuba. We're not changing the subject at all.
No,
because Trump has sent the greatest and the most beautiful naval armada to the Persian Gulf to threaten Iran, to threaten the leadership, the Ayatollah, and the people of Iran. They just failed with Israel, the CIA, MI6, Mossad, to create that incredible uprising in Iran. I'm sure you agree with me. This was sponsored by the United States, Israel, and for sure MI6 to try to overthrow the Ayatollah and the government, and to cause the people, like they do everywhere. It's the playbook. It's what they do everywhere else. But it failed. The government was able to put that down and was able to show that there were maybe hundreds or more of infiltrators from Israel and elsewhere to try to bring the government down. On top of that, he's threatening this country, and Iran is not a little tiny place like Cuba. It's not a small place and Venezuela is a big place. Iran is huge, as you know, and Iran is heavily militarized. Thousands of missiles of all kinds. I read a report the other day. They got more missiles than I can count on two hands, different types, and drones by the tens of thousands. They have said, Peter, this is shocking. Trump, if you try another stunt, or Israel tries another stunt, like you did when you supposedly bombed our nuclear research facility, and in a 12-day war, this time we will strike you everywhere. Peter, not much attention is being paid to this. I'm looking on media today here in Russia, and there's hardly a word about it. And this, to me,
in Russia, there's hardly a word. That's surprising to me.
I've been reading on the English language websites, hardly anything today about what's going on. The only thing that I read, Peter, was that, and the article disappeared after a few hours. I mean, I think they keep refreshing their RT keeps refreshing their website, every few hours. But the one thing that they reported, and I hope that it's true and not fake, is that Russia and China both have naval resources in the area and are conducting live fire exercises together with Iran in that area, in the Gulf and in the Straits of Hormuz. Peter, when you talk about the threat of nuclear war. Israel, we know, has nuclear missiles. Will they use them? Pakistan, if this is true, I read that if Israel attacks Iran with a nuclear weapon, Pakistan may attack Israel with one of their nuclear missiles. Peter, this is insanity. It's not insanity, it's pure evil. But give me your thoughts on what's going on now surrounding Iran and Trump's threat to take it down.
First, Regis, let me disagree with you a little bit. You're right that Mossad and CIA and MI6 are all behind the protests. However, I think we should acknowledge that the Iranian people have got a lot to protest about. And if I were in Iran, I'd be probably out there in the streets protesting, but recognizing that Pompeo and others said that there's a Mossad agent standing next to every Iranian protester. So the protests are legitimate about hardship, suffering, lack of freedom, repressive theocracy. I mean, I would hate the government in Iran if I were an Iranian citizen. However, as you're saying, the legitimate protest is being co-opted in the most malign way by external forces who are pushing for regime change. But you better be careful what you wish for, because in addition to the nuclear threats that you're talking about, there's a lot of nuclear material there that could fall into the hands of some pretty bad actors if the government is toppled. So, but that is not what Trump is thinking about. Part of what Trump wants to do is just show how strong he is, that he can dictate anything anywhere in the world. This is also the Netanyahu agenda. Israel has managed to dramatically weaken all of Iran's proxies throughout the region, throughout the Middle East, and increasingly isolate Iran, which is why it's so important that Russia and China form this, not exactly a military alliance, but they are working together and trying to show that Iran is not isolated. Also, when Trump threatened to use force to overthrow the government in Iran, when he said he's going to come to the aid of the protesters, because Trump, he loves protesters, aside from the ones he's shooting and terrorizing and brutalizing and arresting and criminalizing and demeaning in Minneapolis or Chicago or Los Angeles or every other American city. He loves the protesters in Tehran. And so if the Iranian government cracks down on them, Trump is going to overthrow that government. But you look at the things that Trump is demanding, that Iran give up its nuclear enrichment program, that Iran give up its missile program, and that Iran cuts off ties to all the proxies in the region. Well, we have to remember that under Obama in 2015, Iran did agree to give up its uranium enrichment. They mothballed almost all of their everything that they had. They shipped out 97% of their enriched uranium. They limited the level of uranium enrichment. This was an incredibly good deal that Obama negotiated. Then Trump gets in there, and in 2018, he tears it up. Why is there a crisis with Iran? Then in June, Trump bombed the Iranian sites, and including Fordow and Isfahan and Natanz. So Trump acted totally illegally in terms of international law, but showed that the law of the jungle prevails, and he's threatening Iran now. You mentioned before that Iran is not a little country like Cuba. When the U.S. invaded Iraq In 2003, Iraq had approximately 25 million people. Iran today has a population of approximately 90 million people. So almost 4 times, more than 3 times the size of Iraq. What did it take for the U.S. to subdue the Iraqis? 10 years or more of fighting and war and horrific circumstances it created there, and chaos and brutality. What's it going to be require for the U.S. to succeed against Iran? As you said, Iran has threatened there's going to be regional war. It's going to go after Israel. It's going to go after the U.S. forces in Bahrain. It's going to go after the Al Udeid site in Qatar. It's going to go after U.S. bases potentially in Turkey. The U.S. has a lot of assets in the region that are very, very vulnerable. And Israel's Iron Dome, that in the 12-day war in June, many people thought of it as the Iron Sieve. You know, it was effective in shooting down some of Iran's missiles, but that was a half-hearted attack by Iran. At this point, it's regime survival. It's an existential threat, and they know that what they're going to unleash, as you suggested, can be massive, can overwhelm the Israeli and U.S. and other defenses in the region, create tremendous havoc. It's proved to be a defeat to Donald Trump's hegemonic fantasies. And so the U.S. moved the Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier to the region, as well as enormous assets, military assets. It already has another 50,000 troops to the region, in addition to what it already had there. This is going to be ugly. And as you suggest, it could easily spill over into nuclear war. You mentioned Pakistan. Israel, as we know, is armed to the teeth with nuclear weapons. And if they start succeeding in their attacks on Israel, anything becomes possible. Does Russia and China get involved? Who knows with these kind of things, because they always spiral out of control. Whenever they've attempted to do war games about limiting nuclear war in recent decades, they never are able to limit it. It always goes in the war games to full-scale nuclear war, which we know means the end of civilization, possibly the end of life on our planet. And especially with a leader like Trump, who, first of all, doesn't think a day beyond the end of his own life, and doesn't think about anything that happened in the past. This man is a pathological narcissist, and he's delusional, and he doesn't care about anything beyond himself and his friends and his family. It's a frightening situation that could careen out of control so easily. Trump backed down last time because the Israelis and the Gulf Arabs warned him that this is going to create regional havoc, and it could have disastrous results for the U.S. allies in the region. So Trump backed down. But you put all those assets there. We saw they did it around Venezuela. Eventually, they're going to be used. Something's going to trigger it, and they're going to be used. And the consequences are horrific.
Peter, something else we haven't talked about. There's several of the countries, the Arab countries in the Middle East, have told Trump they've closed off their airspace to any military activity, no overflights. And so when I look at that, and I look at Russia and China participating in joint military live fire exercises, this is two very strong signals to Trump: back off. And I just read something today that Trump said, well, we're not ready to attack yet. And so maybe he's getting the message, or the people in the Pentagon are getting the message that, you know what, you really don't stand a chance of doing anything militarily again in the region. At least I hope so.
Except Trump brayed like an ass after the attack in June. You know, the greatest attack, the greatest planning. We destroyed their nuclear facilities forever. You know,
surgical,
surgical, yeah.
surgical.
But he considered it as a major victory.
Yeah.
Now you're talking about, you're thinking that this is a rational human being who would look at the situation and say, oh, no, this is much too precarious. It's not worth the risk. I don't know that the man is capable of that kind of logical thinking, and nobody stands up to him. And there is nobody between him and the nuclear codes, literally nobody. So I'm afraid that anything is possible. I hope that Russia and China, understand what, and I know they do understand what they're dealing with. If Putin had any illusions about Trump being a friend, he was disabused of those notions a long time ago. The Russians know, Lavrov knows. As Lavrov said, every time I hear America first, it reminds me of Deutschland über alles, and for good reason.
Well, you mentioned Putin, and I don't think it's really off topic. What we've been getting in the news here for the last week is that this Kirill Dmitriev has been meeting in Florida with Witkoff and Kushner.
Yes.
And they keep saying, we've made progress. They said the same things after the meetings in Moscow and the meetings in wherever it was. Gosh, my memory is failing here, Peter. Somewhere in the Middle East.
Yeah.
They said, oh, we've made great progress. Well, Peter, here we see Putin. He accepts a visit from Witkoff and Kushner on a couple of occasions, but even recently, it was last week or so, or maybe it was back in December, shaking hands with him, smiling. He met with him for several hours, and we've made great progress. And my point is, give me a break. Great progress on what? Lavrov has never been in the room. You know that Witkoff and Kushner are not diplomats. They're not talking about any of the issues Russia has in terms of its security, although I think Putin always reminds them. They're there trying to tempt Putin and the Russians. Look, we can do these great deals in real estate, and we can build a Trump Mar-a-Lago just south of Yalta here, and Trump can envision an 18-hole championship golf course in the same area, and yet Putin smiles and he treats them with respect. He doesn't kick him out. He doesn't. And the same thing with Donald. Okay, it's Donald, and Donald understands. And I guess the point I'm getting at with this, Peter, is the Russians are not stupid. They don't have any illusions about the friendliness of the United States in the persons of Witkoff and Kushner or Donald Trump. They just don't want to go head to head. I think Putin does not want to piss off Trump. His whole thing has been to make Trump feel like he's the greatest, he's wonderful, and we can work together.
And that's what almost every leader around the world does. Trump is so shallowly transparent. Everybody knows how to play the guy. You flatter him, you bribe him, you give him gifts, you say how wonderful he is, and is the greatest diplomat in history. Well, they don't believe a word of it, but they're all trying to manipulate this shallow narcissist who loves it. So if he goes to the Middle East, so you have these glowing orbs, or these cabinet meetings where they go around and one after another says what a brilliant, tremendous, wonderful leader he is. He's so shallow that he likes that rather than as an adult. He's not an adult. He's a child. And which is why I think that your quote you gave from his mother is accurate. it, it's totally true. You don't deal with him the way you deal with other statesmen, but he's more dangerous because he doesn't feel there are any limits on his power or what he can do or how he can use force. There was just a meeting yesterday between Shoigu and Wang Yi, and they talked about the need for a new global order, a global order based upon justice and decency and diplomacy and shared interests. And they said, in contrast to this might makes right law of the jungle that we see emerging even more rapidly in 2026 than we saw it before. They all see this. When I used to go to Russia, I've been there 9 times now, and around 2015, 2016, 2017, I went to these conferences and I would often be the only one supporting Hillary Clinton. Everybody there would be pro-Trump. And I would say, I despise Clinton. I hate everything she stands for, but at least she's rational. You don't want a leader with access to the nuclear weapons in the United States who's so rash, impulsive, selfish, narcissistic. That is not in Russia's interest. And it took some time for people to come around, but now all my Russian friends agree that this Donald Trump is a nemesis of a sort that we're not prepared. The world doesn't know how to deal with, really. And the situation in the Middle East now is very dangerous. Also, the fantasy about Gaza on the Riviera that Trump's going to produce there, Kushner and Witkoff.
on the bones of Palestinians.
Right, on the bones of Palestinians.
Kushner has already said they've already. I haven't seen anything else, but I just read this one thing. He said we're already making progress in cleaning up the rubble from the destruction, so that we can have this Trump Riviera. It is so disgusting, Peter. Disgusting what these people are doing and saying and planning. Now, I want to move on, and not really moving on, but I've been saying the chickens have come home to roost in the United States. And what the United States has been doing, brutalizing weaker countries around the world forever, raping and pillaging and stealing their resources, stealing their labor. What's happened in Minneapolis in the last several weeks or so has indicated to me that now the brutality and the endless war has finally come back to the United States with what we're witnessing is happening right now with ICE in Minneapolis. Peter, I cried when it was first reported that this Renee Good was shot dead. And I saw the videos. There's no other way to interpret that. They spun it. They made her, they even said she was a lesbian and she's sleeping with her partners. And it's like, it's the same thing that they do just to make people hate, to make people, they're playing against our weaknesses. And it was just, I have 3 classmates that we go way back to high school, all the way through college and through our theological studies. None of them became priests, but they're all together. They live within a mile of where Renee Good was shot and this Alex Preddy. They've been sending reports to a few of us classmates that are still connected. They've been talking about how horrific it's been.
Yeah.
But they've been talking about their heroic efforts to help the people, their neighbors, their people of color who are afraid to come out of the house. They're going shopping for them. They're getting them their basic needs. They have grandchildren, by the way, who are of mixed race, both 2 of my friends. And their children are afraid to go to school. They're staying at home. They're trying to do online learning. Peter, I want your thoughts I'm very emotional. You're much more rational and calm than I am, but I couldn't help but act with extreme emotion and anger at what Donald Trump is doing in the United States. You know, he first sent ICE to Portland, to Los Angeles, to Chicago. And I don't know if he sent him to Boston or Philadelphia, but he certainly threatened. Peter.
Regis, I was asked the other day in an interview, um, where else has Donald Trump sent ICE? And so I looked it up, and New York, Philadelphia, Boston, almost Detroit, almost any American city you can name, ICE has been there. The big ones are the ones you mentioned: Portland, Los Angeles, Chicago, Minneapolis. Like you, I don't have close friends there, but a lot of my wife's family is from Minneapolis, and we're hearing the reports from them, the same kind of horror stories. I'm old enough to have been an anti-war protester during the Vietnam War in the 60s. And I was there in Chicago in 1968. And I saw a police rampage, and I saw the brutality, and I saw the really unfocused violence and hatred that they had for the protesters. And with SDS, one of our strategies was to bring the war back home, tear the liberal face off the smiling war machine, the fascistic war machine that underlay the strength, brutality, repression here. So say that is not just what the US was doing, killing millions of Vietnamese. They had the capability of doing the same thing if their power and control were threatened in the United States. But there were fetters. Even Richard Nixon had limits on what he was capable of doing. Mayor Daley had limits. Lyndon Johnson had limits. I mean, there was a certain idea that this is not acceptable in the United States, even though they might do it overseas. And they did it overseas. And the Vietnamese tell me now, the leaders, that 5 million Vietnamese died in the war against the United States. So they're capable of unfettered brutality overseas. But now they're bringing it back to the United States. They are, as you say, these jackboots, Gestapo, masked, unidentifiable brutes. The Alex Preddy, 6 or 7 of them. First, he goes to help a woman who's being knocked down by them and pepper sprayed, and they pepper spray him in the face. And then they remove his gun, which he was carrying legally and had a permit for. And then when he's down on all fours on the ground and not capable of posing any threat, they pump 9 bullets into his back to kill him. Or Renee Good also got murdered in cold blood on video. So, but the Americans are horrified. Maybe you could say that Black Americans have been used to this level of racist violence by police sporadically over the years in the United States, which led to the Black Lives Matter movement. But right now, those 2 Americans who got murdered in Minneapolis by ICE and Border Patrol people are white Americans. They are American-born white people. And what you see getting arrested and brutalized are not just the dark-skinned people, horrible as that is, but also white people now, which we always knew was the case, because it was anybody who stands up against the power of these evildoers. And Trump, one of the things that's most important to him is to act as egregiously. It's not that he's doing things according to the books. It's that he goes outside and there's no limits. And that was Hitler's playbook. We saw that, the military and the police in the streets, the attacking innocent people, unlimited violence terrorizing entire populations and saying we can do this with impunity, and Congress isn't going to stop us, and the Supreme Court isn't going to stop us, and the Democrats can't stop us. This is we haven't ever seen before this way in the United States. And it's tragic because this country, I remember a line from Phil Oakes' song, "I declare the war is over," about Vietnam. And he said, I forget the exact words, but even treason might be worth a try. This country is too young to die. Well, it still is a young country. It's 250 years, celebrating its 250th birthday this year. And it's too young to die. And it's too young to die at the hands of a fascist goon like Donald Trump and his minions. So we're not going to let it die. Because the other good thing about Minneapolis, as you suggest, is that people are out there protesting. They're standing up, not because they're not scared, but because they are scared. And they're saying that we're not going to let these kinds of police state Gestapo tactics win in Minneapolis or elsewhere. And now Trump is backing down a little bit in Minneapolis. And he got Bovino out of there. He replaced him with Homan, who's not any better, but he at least got Bovino out of there. And they're beginning to compromise, because even some of his own supporters are horrified by this. And the polling is terrible. American people don't like this, didn't support this. While many were concerned about the border and excessive immigration, they didn't want to see people brutalized. They don't want to see people beaten up in the streets, shot in the streets, families broken up. This is not, maybe there's some Americans who are so dead inside in their souls that they approve of this stuff, just like there were some Germans who did, and some Americans who urged us on in Vietnam and the other things we do. But most Americans are much more decent than that. And Trump and the Republicans know they're going to get slaughtered in the midterm elections.
Peter, I think one of the most horrifying visuals was to see these ICE guys masked, like we saw where there have been insurrections elsewhere around the world. They're always masked, and there's no name. They don't have their names. They don't have any markings. All they have on is ICE. And just the image of that in America, these goons being turned loose without any restrictions. And then I think it was Vance who came out and said they have complete immunity. They will never have to be brought to justice. This is just not what most Americans believe the country was about. Right. And I think just that visual of these masked goons beating on people, pepper spraying people, kidnapping even kids is something that I think Americans have found disgusting. And you mentioned the polling is going in the opposite direction. Yes. Trump's favorability is dropping, yes. I think. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is all three of my classmates have been sending reports. One of them has been the most defiant. He talked about there's tens of thousands of us in the streets. And yes, we're afraid. And yes, we're angry. He said, but we're not going away. And what he said was, and all three of them have said this, but they believe what Trump wants is violence.
Yes.
And they are these three are absolutely convinced that what Trump wants to do is to declare martial law, invoke the whatever that Insurrection Act is, and then there'll be no midterm elections because Trump knows he's going to get clobbered. Peter, your thoughts?
That's a plausible scenario. we don't know what goes on inside that sick little brain of Donald Trump's, and it changes by the hour. You never know. He never knows what's gonna happen next. Um, but does he think that far ahead? Is he that strategic to know that this is his formula for stopping the elections? What we've seen recently is some Republicans in the Senate and the House have somehow found at least a tiny bit of integrity and decency and voted against Trump on some of these crucial issues. They even for self-interest, because their constituents, the Democrats have been kicking Republicans' butts in all the special elections. Republicans are running scared. They know that Donald Trump is a lame duck or a lame fuck, if you want to call him, whatever you want to call him. But he, and that it's a sinking ship, and that this stuff is not working. And so Trump, hearing from them, is beginning to quake about Minneapolis and the thuggish tactics. We don't know. I mean, he's got see the people around him, the Millers and the Vances and the Gnomes. People are calling for Kristi Noem to step down. Go back home and keep shooting dogs. But get out of Minneapolis. And the Democrats stood up on the budget, and now that unless there's dramatic changes in Homeland Security, they're not going to. I hope not going to vote for it. You never can trust the Chuck Schumers and the other Democratic leaders, because they're as gutless and spineless and obsequious as it's hard to believe that they don't have more of a spine. But this is even Obama didn't have a spine. Obama had a brain, but he didn't have a spine, and he caved in to all of the people who looted the country in 2007 and 2008, 2009. Not a single one of them went to jail after the crimes they committed. So we've seen this kind of gutlessness, but there are also some signs of fighting. And there's American people have been supporting the protesters in Minneapolis, and Trump sees that. And it's not as much as you or I would like it to be. And partly it's been limited by the fact that this is the coldest winter that I can remember. It's freezing out there with lots of snow, and people are still in Minneapolis, even though it's below zero, going out there and protesting, which is great. It says something positive about America, but we've got to go in even more and stronger than we've been doing. And it would be nice if we had an opposition party that had some integrity. And the Democrats, some of the people do, but even the young people, I see with my young students, they're part of the COVID generation. They don't have much of a backbone. They don't have much firm conviction. It's not like young people even a few years ago who were clearly progressive and cared about these issues. So, I mean, a lot of them do, not nearly as many as I wish did and would. And we've seen people caving in. We saw some of the law firms cave in. We saw the universities cave in. We've seen city officials cave in. They don't need to. The reality is, if they stand up to a bully, maybe they'll get their nose bloodied, but in the long run, they're going to win.
Well, Peter, I want to end on this positive note. My friends, speaking for, I think, the tens of thousands of people in Minneapolis who are still in the streets, they're not going away. They are demanding that they're going to take back their country. And I hope that they are the example of what the rest of America needs to do, just like they did in the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
Okay, when it became too great, the coalitions of Americans of all demographic groups that turned against that war. I'm hoping, Peter, that what's happening and what Americans are seeing in Minneapolis is going to spread. I can only hope that it will. And my friends have said, we are here not just to protect our city, to protect our mayor, to protect our governor, who are both standing up to Trump, but we are here to take back our country.
And,
Peter?
Regis, let me just even expand that, because we need people all over the planet to stand up against tyranny, brutality, the law of the jungle, fascism, exploitation. The fact that the billionaires' increase in wealth last year is more than the total wealth of the poorest half of the global population. The increase alone is more than the total wealth of the poorest half of the global population, is an obscenity and cannot be tolerated. And we need people to stand up globally and fight for a new kind of order, new kind of security, stability, new kind of justice, and a better world that everybody deserves.